going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be showing you how to check and replace a unitized hub. That is a bearing slash hub assembly on your four-wheel drive pickups on the front. This will be the exact same steps for 99 to 07 classic body style Chevrolet Silverado, GMC Sierra, and should be the same basic steps for most four-wheel drive pickups, just have different fastener sizes. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, the first thing we want to do is go ahead and get a jack under something solid. Check the wheel bearing out. I'm going to choose to go under the lower A-arm here, just to pick it up. And I know this bearing is bad already because I've checked it. Now what you're going to do is either put both hands up here, or one on top and one on the bottom, and just kind of rock the tire. You probably can't see that very well, but you can hear it. There's definitely some play, and then you can go side to side as well. This bearing is definitely junk. You want to make sure though, when you're checking this up and down and side to side, that your tie rods are also not bad. I've already checked over the front end. I know the ball joints and the tie rod ends are good, so I know for a fact this is the bearing. Next we'll remove the center cap to access the lug nuts. And if you have an air impact, you can go ahead and start removing the lug nuts. If you're going to be doing this by hand, you have to lower it back down and crack the lug nuts loose. I believe these are technically, I don't have metric with me right now. The 13/16 is just a little too small, and the 7/8 has just a little bit of play, but we'll make it work. Now once these are cracked loose, we can go ahead and jack it back up. And by the way, this should be the same steps for 2500s as well. Everything's just going to be a little bit more beefy, probably slightly bigger bolts, and you should have 8 lugs versus 6. Now before removing the wheel, it's advised to use a jack stand to support the weight of the truck. Alright, now you've got the wheel set aside. Next step is going to be to remove this dust cap here, which looks like I've already done once. I think I've already done this wheel bearing. You're going to come behind it with either a flathead or a chisel or a punch or something under this little lip. I've already dented it one time, so it should be pretty easy. Now we have access to our axle shaft nut. Actual size may vary. I believe this is actually a 32 millimeter, or sorry, a 35 millimeter. I have a 36 right here. Just got a little bit, but again, it'll work. All right, now to remove this nut, we can do one of 3 things. First, if you're alone, you can take a pry bar, try to stick the pry bar between the studs of the wheel hub, so that way it jams against the ground when you're trying to loosen this. It'll prevent the hub from turning. If you have somebody to help you, just have them step on the brakes while you crack this free. And another method would be to use a prop rod. Prop rod. Now this nut should be fairly tight. It torques to about 180 foot-pounds. So don't be surprised if you gotta put a little bit of gusto behind it. Sometimes there's a washer back here. Make sure to pull that off, don't lose it. Now if you're using a prop rod on the brake pedal, make sure to remove that before you try to remove your brake caliper, or it's going to make it real difficult for you. Now the next step is going to be to remove the brake caliper, which is held on by 2 bolts. This one here, and another one down here. For some reason, GM decided to use stupid Torx heads instead of a hex head, so this is a T55 Torx you're going to need for this. This guy. Make sure you maybe give it a little persuasion with a hammer, tap it in a little bit. Some rust can build up here. You want to make sure you don't round this thing out. You want to make sure it's pounded in all the way, but don't slip. You round this thing out, you're not going to have fun getting it out. Holy cow! Really on there. There we go. Alright, now the caliper mounting bolt also doubles as the slide pin, which is what allows the caliper to slide side to side, allowing equal brake pad wear. So when you get it loose, you'll have to pull out on it. As you can see, It's supposed to be lubricated a bit, so we're gonna not set this on the dirty ground. I'm gonna set it up somewhere where it's clean so I don't get a bunch of grime on this. If this is really rusty, make sure to take it to a wire wheel, because if these get rusted up, they can seize, and when they get seized, they can't slide in here, which means your brake caliper won't slide, and you're gonna end up with one pad that's metal on metal, and the other one's gonna have full meat left on it. All right, on to the second one. Probably a better method to use a cheater pipe, if anything, rather than slamming on it with your hand or a hammer. Kind of asking for it. Now here's where you need a bungee cord and a pry bar. It's been a while since this thing's been apart. It's pretty rusty. Just gotta kind of work it. Pry away on the top of the caliper, and then come down to the bottom and pry as well. Before you get the caliper all the way off, I take the bungee, hook it through the little bolt mounting hole, and try to find something that you can hook this to hold it up, because I don't like letting the weight of the caliper dangle by this little flimsy rubber brake line. It's kind of asking for it to rip and cause more headache. So now we can go ahead and remove the brake pads. So obviously now would be a great time to do brakes and rotors if you need to do it. They gotta come off anyway. And as you can see, I'm about due, but I'm too dang broke to do it right now, so these old used crappy ones are gonna be going back on for a little while. Now that the pads are off, we're gonna remove the two mounting bolts for the caliper bracket. They are here and here. Now I've gone ahead and I've turned my steering wheel so that it's easier to access the bolt. So we're on the driver's side. I turned the steering to the right, so now I can get at the bolts a little bit better so I'm not buried in the wheel well here. Again, these bolts are going to be a metric, which I don't have, so the closest thing I have is an 11/16, and I'm going to have to probably pound it on. It's very tight, but in a pinch, the 11/16 will work. You can see there's Loctite on it. Make sure when it crashes to the ground like that, you don't lose your little shims here for your brake pads. Those are important. Now we can remove the rotor, which, you know, mine's coming off nice. You might have to hit the back of it. A little bit of persuasion. Sometimes the rust builds up on this ridge here in the center of the rotor. It doesn't want to come off. Set that aside. And now that we've got the wheel cocked anyways, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna remove this bolt for the wheel hub, because it's easier to get at with the wheel turn. The wheel bearing / hub mounting bolts are 15mm. Rust. You can see it actually comes through right here. So if you're turning your ratchet and you see that this is not turning, you're going to be snapping the bolt, so you would need to maybe float across here with an air hammer or heat this up or something. You don't want to break these off, because then you're having a bad time. Oh, fantastic engineering there, GM. Jesus. I just gave it a quick little rap tap on the back of the screwdriver with my hammer to get this bolt past this ridge here on the CV shaft. There's one bolt out, there should be three. One up here at the top, and then another one on the front side. So I'm gonna try to get this top one right now, and then we're gonna turn the wheel to the opposite direction, and we're gonna get the front one. And as you can see here, in the case of the top bolt, there was another awesome engineering idea. They put the ball joint bolt super close to it, so you can't use a deep well socket. Got to use a shallow chromie, and then I'm going to come in here with an extension, get my ratchet on that. Oh man, they were just full of great ideas, weren't they? Alright, so in the case of this one, I'm not going to pull it out all the way. I'm just going to pull it far enough back, because it threads into the hub, so we really don't need to pull it out all the way anyways. We're just going to pull it back as far as we can, out of the way. Now we're going to turn the wheel the opposite direction. Now we have access to the final bolts behind the tie rod.
With the right leverage and the proper application of strength, the door will lift free.
And with the proper leverage, this should bust loose. Now here's a little quick tip for you. If you've got an ABS sensor code and you replaced your sensor and you know your connector is good up at that end, I have had it before where you got to take this little screw out, pop the sensor back out, and what happens is rust builds up like this on the mounting surface between the sensor and the hub. So you got to take the sensor off, sand it down with some sandpaper or a wire wheel or something, get all that rust off, and put the sensor back in, bolt it in. What happens is the rust forces the sensor further away from the tone ring on the hub and it can't pick up the wheel speed. So if you're having issues like that, quick tip for you. Speaking of ABS, we're gonna have to, if you have ABS obviously, follow the wire and we're gonna disconnect it up here on the frame. On this particular vehicle, we come up here behind the splash guard right next to the shock. Sorry for the bad picture here, but it's this connector right here. There's just a little tab that you gotta push up on, unhook it. And it's got this little slide lock right here, holds it in place. Now we'll take a flathead screwdriver and just open up these little plastic clips to hold the sensor in place. Actually, you might want to look at your new hub first, because a lot of times the new hub comes with these on it, so you can just rip these out. Just as I suspected. New clips, so we can just rip the old ones out. And by the way, it's advisable to look over your new part and make sure at least it looks somewhat in resemblance to what you've got on there before you start tearing into it any further. If you're having issues accessing the plug, the connector for the ABS sensor, you can pop the hood, come here, and this is it right here. And the connector was just sliding onto this little collar, which I'm going to pull this out because, as I said, the new ABS wire comes with a new clip on it. I just grabbed that sucker with the side cutters and pry it on out. It's just like a little panel clip with little fingers on it to hold it in. Same with all these ones. Just yank them out. Now it's all disconnected. Push this thing through. Now all that's left is to get the hub out. If you're lucky, it'll fall right out. Well, that's pretty much never. So what you do is, I would straighten the wheel back out, which I'm going to do right now. First attempted method would be to take a sledgehammer, at least a 3-pound sledge, not some baby claw hammer that you would use to pound a nail to hang a picture, a real man hammer, roughneck, and come from behind here and start tapping like this. And alternate from side to side. If that does not work, if you have air tools, you can take an air hammer and start put a bit in there and start floating around the bearing to try to crack it free. What I'm going to use today, and I'll post the link in the description below if you guys want to buy this thing, but it's about 130 bucks, so if you're only doing one wheel bearing every once in a while, it's probably not worth it. But since I wrench for a living, it's called the Hub Buster. It's a pretty beefy piece of metal. It's gonna sit on here like this. I'll show you how to set it up. It's pretty universal. We're just gonna put it on 2 studs. It comes with this flange nut kit, so that way you don't damage your factory lug nuts, but if you have to in a pinch, you can use the factory ones. Find the right one for our thread pitch. For this exact truck, we're gonna be using the 14mm nuts. Make sure everything's tight. Alright, now we're going to rotate this thing up. You can't mess it up. It says strike here, where they got this welded plate for a little bit of extra beef. And we're going to swing it beef. Obviously it'll take more than one hit sometimes, so I'm just gonna go keep doing that until I have it out. Alright, so I've given this thing a couple hits, and you can see there's a gap here starting to form, which is good. That means it's starting to come off. So I'm just gonna keep working my way around. Obviously, don't keep hitting it just on the one side because you'll cock the bearing and it'll get stuck. You wanna keep hitting it from different sides, make it come out nice and even. By the way, here's the perfect demonstration proving the bearing is bad. You can see that the mounting surface of the hub will stay stationary while this portion just wiggles. Junk. Alright, now I've got it loose. Final problem that you might run into is that if this is really rusty in here, the axle shaft, that can sometimes get stuck to here, and you might need a puller that threads onto the studs and pushes in on that. But I think we'll be alright here. A little bit of hammer persuasion usually helps. Always a fight. There we go. Alright, well, you can see here, my little dust shield came off, which at that point, water probably got in here and wrecked this thing. It's just all dry junk. This here is just a stupid dust shield for your brakes. I absolutely hate them because what happens is, honestly, they don't do jack squat anyway. And all they do is they'll rust over time and they'll get flimsy and they'll start warping outwards, and then they'll start rubbing on your wheel or your rim or whatever. And so I'm just gonna chuck this thing away. We got our new hub here. If you're doing it on an exact truck like this, the 99 to 07 Classic, GMC Sierra, Chevy Silverado, I'll post a couple of links in the description where you can get a couple different bearings if you'd like to purchase it online. So what we're checking here is we want to make sure the spline count is the same, count how many splines there are in the center. We want to make sure that the stud thread pitch is the same, make sure that there's the same amount of studs and that they're evenly spaced the same as this one. Make sure that the 3 mounting bolts have the same threads, mounting holes have the same threads. And last but not least, make sure your ABS connector is the same, because if you get this thing bolted in there and your wheel doesn't bolt up for some reason, or your sensor doesn't plug in, you're gonna be pissed. So everything on mine is good. We're gonna go ahead and slide it onto the CV shaft. Make sure the ABS sensor is towards the front of the truck. And just like it took some persuasion to get the old one off, it will probably take some persuasion to get the new one in. Line up your bolt holes. Once you get it in far enough, if you can get your bolts started, you can kind of use the bolts to suck this thing in the rest of the way so you're not wailing on a brand new wheel bearing. Just make sure that we're sucking it in nice and even. Don't start one bolt and try to tighten it all the way because it's going to cock the bearing. Make sure you tighten in a triangle pattern evenly. Again, turn the wheel left and right accordingly to get your hub mounting bolts in. Now I strongly recommend starting all 3 of these bolts before you do the final tightening on them. Otherwise they might, like this one, see I got 2 of them started, but the 3rd one doesn't want to start. So now it's not completely tight. I can still move this hub around a little bit and get this bolt hole to line up and get it to start threading. Now, as with the brake caliper bolts, if these are rusty, I would advise taking a wire wheel to the threads before putting these back in. Like I said, you will have to go back and forth with the wheel a couple times, so it will get a bit tedious. This bolt over here, I have it as tight as I can go without forcing it, and you can see it's still not bottomed out because there's a bigger gap on this side. So we got to keep alternating until it's sucked in flat. Now the gap is on the top. All 3 of them are snug right now. We're gonna go ahead and do the final torque. I've got my torque wrench with me. He's torqued to 133 foot-pounds, believe it or not. Quite a high number for such a bolt. But if you don't have a torque wrench, you're basically just gonna have to do the old German specs Guten type. Luckily I've got a torque wrench, so I'm gonna go ahead and torque it to 133, and we'll go on from there. Alright, they're all torqued. I'm going to go ahead and run the new ABS sensor wiring. Plug it in, plug it in. Now oftentimes the new hub will come with a new nut, so I might as well use it. I'm going to go ahead and put this washer back on first. Same size as the other one. Now before we can tighten this all the way, we got to put the brakes back on. Some rotors will have an additional 1 or 2 holes in the mounting surface here, where there's actually mounting screws. They're usually at Torx. They hold the rotor to the hub. So mine does not have that, but I'll post a picture here in a couple seconds showing you what I'm talking about. You will need to remove those 2 screws or 1 screw, however many there are, in order to get the rotor completely off if you do have them. So we're going to reinstall the caliper mounting bracket. It's going to go with the arched portion facing outwards towards you. And as you can tell by the mounting mark here, it's going to go like this, not like this. So we're going to go ahead, reinstall the rotor quick, replace it if you need to. And as I was saying before, if you happen to have the 1 or 2 or 3, however many screws holding the rotor to the hub, make sure you reinstall those as well. Now that the rotor's on, we can go ahead, stick this on there to start our bolts. And again, I'm turning the wheel to better access bolts. These ones I'm finding very mixed torque specs on. Some people are saying 120 foot-pounds all the way up to 220 depending on the brake setup. Judging by the diameter of this bolt, I'm not going to go any higher than that 120. Most people will just cinch them down with an impact or give them a pretty good hoof with the foot-long ratchet. I would be tightening them about as tight as you did those hub mounting bolts. Now that the caliper bracket is on, we can go ahead and reinstall our brake pads. We can go ahead and tip the front of the pad in like that, get it in there, then rotate it. Get these fingers to line up. And you might have to give it just a little love tap. Tap, tap, tappy-a-roo.
Just tap it in. Just tap it in. Give it a little tappy. Tap, tap, tap-a-roo.
Repeat the same on the back side. Now we can go ahead and reinstall our caliper. Make sure that you don't have the hose all kinked. No brake pressure would suck. Might have to give it a little rap tap with the hammer to get it on. Make sure your boots are straight. And now we can go ahead and reinstall our caliper mounting bolts / slide pins. Like I said, make sure you take these to a wire wheel if they're real rusty. And then go ahead and put some grease on them or some anti-seize. Keep them from seizing and allow them to slide. Again, very mixed reviews on the torque specs for the caliper mounting bolts. I'm seeing anywhere from 80 to 200 again, which is just an outrageous range. So again, use your best judgment. I would not torque them any tighter than the mounting bracket bolts or the hub mounting bolts. Alright, I've got the wheel straight again. Got the prop rod back on the brakes, or get your other person or pry bar, however you want to do it. And we're going to do the final torque for this nut. Almost done. Right, now the final torque on this is pretty important, so make sure, if you can, get a torque wrench. Spec for this is 175 foot-pounds on this truck. We'll go ahead, reinstall this dust shield. It's not super important, it just kind of keeps crap out of here, keeps this from rusting. So if you got a couple dings in it like this, it's not the end of the world. Just kind of pop it in like that, and then same way you got it out, just use a little punch or a flathead or tap it in with the hammer. Now we're ready to put the wheel back on. Put your wheel back on, start all your lug nuts. I like to push the wheel up against the hub firmly and just kind of cinch them all down a little bit before torquing them. Make sure the wheel's centered. Kind of alternate the lug pattern. Now that they're all snug, we can go ahead and drop the truck back down. Torque spec for the lug nuts is 120 to 140 foot-pounds. I'm going to go to the 140 mark. Since it's a 6 lug, you can't really do a star pattern. I'm just going to go every other lug. This one, then that one, then that one. And then I'll start at this one, that one, that one. Now, I would advise retorquing these after about 50 to 100 miles worth of driving. But for now, we're going to go ahead and reinstall our center cap. On the GMCs, you can see there's kind of like a little half moon here that you got to try to line up. It's real fun. Are you too good for your home?
Why didn't you just go home? That's your home! Are you too good for your home? Answer me!
Alright, there we go. On, done. Wouldn't hurt to jack it back up after the wheels are tightened. Just make sure that that wheel bearing plate is gone. Assuming that's all good, you're done. Like I said, retorque the lug nuts after you drive it a little bit, and that's it. If this video helped you out, make sure you hit that like button. If you want more videos like this, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.